The Assault on Black Reach. By the time Captain Sicarius and the Ultramarines task force arrived on the high world of Black Reach, Wog Zaznag controlled most of the northern continent. Only 3 of the 12 major hive cities still held out. When the strike cruiser, Valen's Revenge, made orbit, the defenses of Gospora, the largest of the 3 towering hive cities still free, were faltering. Zanzig was a war boss of uncommon mechanical skill, and had perfected a design for supercharged shooters that could punch through the Limenruss's armor plating, or even the Space Marines' power armor. With such weapons at their command, the brutal Ork invaders were annihilating Black Reach's defenders. Wasting no time in contemplation, Sicarius ordered his battle brothers to their drop pods and directed the Valen's Revenge to begin an orbital bombardment of Gospora's attackers. The drop pod assault landed hard on the heels of the bombardment. In a brief but bloody battle, the Ultramarines cast the Orks from Gospora's walls, forcing a bloody and beaten Zanzig to retreat. Scarcely had the battle cries ceased, then Sicarius was on the move again. Leaving a portion of his force to bolster Gospora's defenses, Sicarius took off in search of the leader of the Wa. With Sicarius and the bulk of the Ultramarines now elsewhere, the Orks renewed their assault on Gospora Hive. Unfortunately for the Greenskins, Sicarius had foreseen the possibility and ordered the deployment of several Thunderfire cannons to strengthen the Hive's defenses. No sooner did the assault get underway than a salvo of shells tore through the advancing Orks and drove them back to the shelter of the petrified force surrounding Gospora Hive. Meanwhile, Sicarius' search for Zanzig continued. Thunderhawk and Landspeeder reconnaissance patrols identified several Ork encampments along the Black Wallow River. In the space of a week, Sicarius planned and led strikes against each, but although plenty of supercharged shooters were evidence, Zanzig was nowhere to be found. After the 4th Ramshackle Fort was reduced to rubble, Sicarius received an urgent request for assistance from the Black Reach Planetary Defense Forces defending Sulphura Hive. Torn between duties, Sicarius reluctantly abandoned his hunt for Zanzig's base of operations and headed south to Sulphura, leaving the search in the hands of 2 squads of scouts under the command of Sergeant Tellian. Rather than searching the surrounding area, Tellian instructed his scouts to begin surveillance of the destroyed outposts. The sergeant knew the Orks to be scavengers and felt sure they'd return to the sites to recover any scraps of armor or weaponry that could be reused. By nightfall, Tellian's scouts were concealed around the perimeter of the ruined outpost, their eyes and ears alert for the merest sign of any approaching Greenskins. 2 nights later, while Sicarius still fought in the shadow of Sulphura Hive, Tellian's theory proved correct. Under the light of Black Reach's twin moons, a lumpen but serviceable submersible rose from the cloying waters of the Black Wallow. Safely concealed in a cluster of petrified trees to the south, Tellian and his scouts watched as the Ork submersible disgorged a dozen boys and 2 score aggression onto the bank. As the Greenskins spread out and combed the wreckage for whatever detritus that could still be put to use, one of the scouts swam out to the moored submersible and planted a tracer beacon. Come the first sun of morning, the submersible had gone, and Tellian had the location of its base of operations, a vast, natural cavern hidden beneath the Black Wallow waterfall, midway between Gospora and Sulphura hives, and within striking distance to both. On receiving Tellian's news, Sicarius was hearty in his congratulations. Gathering what forces as could be spared from the defense of Sulphura, he boarded the Thunderhawk gunship, Gladius, and headed north with as much speed as he could muster. In the meantime, Tellian's scouts moved into position and busied themselves with the task of eliminating the base's sentries. The first indication Zanzig's boys had that they were under attack was when the nose of Gladius burst through the waterfall spray. For a moment, the gunship's roaring engines held it steady in the center of the cavern, shoot of fire pattering it harmlessly off its hull. Then, with an ear-splitting screech, Gladius unleashed a volley of Hellstrike missiles into a cluster of cans and deft dreads at the rear of the chamber, tearing them apart in a series of fiery explosions that momentarily banished the chamber's gloom. The sound of Hellstrike detonations were still roiling around the chamber when the Thunderhawk's ramp clanged down onto the crude metal walkway as Cato Sicarius led his Ultramarines into battle. Recovering from their shock, the Orks barreled towards the invaders and joined battle with all the bestial fury of their kind. With a roar that echoed through the cavern, tank buses unleashed a volley of rockets that forced the Thunderhawk gunship to withdraw. At the rear of the chamber, Zanzig bellowed at nearby boys to unleash their supercharged shooters at the oncoming Space Marines, but Sicarius had planned his attack well. The first wave of Space Marines were not from Sicarius' own company, but rather the 5 Terminator veterans from the first company. Zanzig's supercharged shooters might be able to penetrate power armor, but against the inviolable tactical dreadnought armor they were near worthless. By the time Zanzag realized his mistake, many of his boys were dead, their bodies heaped around the shattered stalagmites of the cavern floor. With the threat of the guns greatly diminished, Sicarius ordered his power-armored battle brothers into the fray. Even dismayed and robbed of their advantaged weaponry, the Orks fought hard. Sicarius' foothold was tenuous, for the waters of the submersible pens lay to the other side, and Zanzag sent wave after wave of boys forward in the hope of forcing the Space Marines into the inky depths. Nevertheless, the Ultramarines continued to advance, striding forward with the bolters blazing. It took an hour's bloody fighting to secure the cavern, but finally the Orks fled into the network and caves beyond. Sicarius eventually won a bloody victory. Zanzag was dead, cut down by the captain in the closing moments of the battle, but the cost had been high. One of the Terminators was dead, and a dozen of the Ultramarines' second company would not be seen again. As the Gladius returned to redeploy the Ultramarines, Sicarius oversaw the placing of explosives to bring in the roof of the cavern to trap any surviving Orks within the tunnels. In the aftermath of the Ultramarines' evacuation, Sicarius also directed the strike cruiser Valen's Revenge to conduct a thorough bombardment of the site. Within 3 days of the battle at the battle-scarred cavern, Sicarius led a series of strikes that broke the back of the Ork war machine. Though several war bosses attempted to assume control in the weeks that followed, Wog Zanzag was effectively ended with the death of its leader. Too many boys had perished before the walls of the Gorspra and Sophora hives for the Orks to prevail through sheer numbers alone. Furthermore, with the loss of Zanzag's Orky No-Wats and supercharged Shudas, the Greenskins no longer had the technology to compensate. Judging his work finished, Sicarius made ready to leave the world. As the Ultramarines task force left Black Reach for fresh battles, the planet's inhabitants began the long process of reclaiming their world from the surviving Greenskins.